The buzzards were already circling when Mahpe crested the hill. He reined his pony to a halt and studied the column of smoke rising from the prairie floor 2 miles distant. The wind carried the smell of burned canvas, scorched wood, and something else, the sweet, sickening odor of death. In this empty land, where a man could ride for days without seeing another soul smoke, meant trouble. And buzzards meant someone had already lost. Mahpe was 26 years old, a Lakota warrior, born into a world that was ending. The buffalo herds that had once darkened the plains were gone, slaughtered by white hunters who took only the hides, left the meat to rot. The territories where his people had hunted for generations shrank with every treaty the government signed and then broke. Soldiers patrolled from Storm's End, pushing the bands toward reservation boundaries drawn on maps by men who had never walked this land. He wore buckskin leggings, stained dark from long use, a faded blue cavalry shirt he had taken from a supply wagon 3 summers past, and 2 tight braids bound with red cloth his sister Winona had woven. A single eagle feather, earned during a raid against Crow horse thieves when he was 19, jutted from his left braid. His rifle, a Henry repeater with a worn brass receiver, rested across his thighs. 16 rounds in the magazine. He checked it every morning out of habit, the way other men checked the sunrise. The prairie stretched endlessly around him, an ocean of yellowing grass rippling beneath the afternoon sun. September heat pressed down like a hand. No shade anywhere, except the cottonwoods that marked creek beds, and those were miles apart. This was country that killed careless men through thirst, through sun, through rattlesnakes hidden in the sage, or through other men with guns and bad intentions. Mahpe urged his pony forward down the slope toward the smoke. As he drew closer, the wreckage took shape. A freight wagon lay on its side, both axles snapped, wheels jutting at angles that made his gut tighten with recognition. Violence had happened here. The canvas cover had burned halfway down, leaving charred ribs of wood exposed like the skeleton of some huge animal picked clean by scavengers. Broken crates littered the ground, spilling flour and dried beans that mixed with blood to form a dark paste. 3 buzzards hopped along the scorched boards, their naked red heads bobbing as they fed. The driver was slumped over the wagon tongue arms, dangling a bullet hole punched through his spine. The exit wound in his chest was the size of a fist. Flies swarmed the corpse in a black buzzing cloud. No one had closed his eyes. Mahpe dismounted 20 paces out, rifle in his hands, and scanned the surrounding terrain with the careful attention his grandfather had beaten into him as a boy. Boot prints everywhere, 5 men, maybe 6, all wearing the heavy work boots white men favored. The tracks led northeast toward White River, overlapping each other in their haste to leave. One set of prints was deeper than the others, as if the man had been carrying extra weight. He heard a sound beneath the burned tarp. A faint scraping like a wounded animal trying to drag itself to cover. Mahpe moved forward in a crouch, rifle ready. He yanked the canvas aside with his left hand, raising a cloud of ash and the acrid stink of burned wool. Underneath, curled into a ball among shattered crates and scorched fabric, was a white girl. She could not have been more than 7 years old. Her dress had once been pale blue calico, but was now torn and smoke-stained, the hem ripped completely away. Her wrists showed raw abrasions where rope had bitten deep, leaving angry welts that had crusted over with dried blood. She was thin ribs, visible through the torn fabric, blonde hair matted to her skull with sweat and grime. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. She had cried herself voiceless. Mahpe lowered the rifle slowly, keeping his movements deliberate. A Lakota warrior, appearing suddenly from smoke and corpses, would terrify anyone, especially a child who had just survived whatever hell had happened here. He spoke an English accent, thick but clear. "Can you walk?" The girl's eyes rolled toward him. Blue eyes the color of creek water in winter, wide and glassy with shock. She stared at him for 5 long seconds, as if trying to decide whether he was real or some fever dream conjured by trauma. Before she could answer, a bullet slammed into the wagon bed 2 feet from Mape's head. The crack of the rifle shot followed a heartbeat later, echoing across the empty grassland. Mape threw himself flat behind the wagon's bulk as a second bullet punched through charred wood where his chest had been sending splinters flying. 3 riders appeared on the ridge to the north, silhouettes against the sky. Bandanas covered their faces. Rifles glinted in the sunlight. The lead rider wore a black hat with a silver band that caught the light like a mirror. "You bring the girl back or Dead-Eye Dick will flay you alive." The shout carried clearly across the distance, harsh and matter-of-fact. Dead-Eye Dick. The name hit Mape like a fist to the gut. Every warrior from the Platte to the Missouri knew that name. Dead-Eye Dick was a bounty hunter who took scalps regardless of age or guilt, who left bodies displayed as warnings along the trails. If Dead-Eye Dick wanted this child, someone was paying a fortune. Mape scooped the girl into his arms and vaulted into the saddle in one smooth motion born of a lifetime on horseback. The pony bolted before his boots found the stirrups, sensing danger the way animals always did. Another bullet kicked up dirt beside the horse's hooves close enough that gravel stung through Mape's leggings. He drove the pony hard toward a dry arroyo that cut across the prairie like a knife wound, using the curves of the land for cover. Behind him, hoofbeats pounded closer, a drumbeat of pursuit that matched the hammering of his heart. A rifle cracked. The bullet whined past his right shoulder so close, he felt the heat of its passage, felt the air split and snap back together. The girl's heart hammered against his chest, like a trapped bird beating itself senseless against cage bars. Her small fingers dug into his shirt, bunching the fabric. She made no sound, not a cry, not a whimper, but her terror was a living thing pressed between them, hot and suffocating. Mape guided the pony into the arroyo at full gallop, trusting the animal's footing more than his own vision. The walls rose 10 feet on either side, cutting off the worst of the gunfire, but also trapping them in a narrow channel with limited exits. He could hear the riders splitting up, one following the arroyo rim on the left, hoofbeats echoing off stone, 2 more swinging wide to cut him off, where the arroyo opened onto grassland again. He hauled the pony to a sliding stop behind a massive limestone slab that had calved off from the wall centuries ago. Dismounting in one motion, he set the girl down as gently as haste allowed. She crumpled against the rock arms, wrapped around her knees, making herself as small as possible. Mape levered around into the Henry's chamber and braced the barrel against stone. His breathing steadied automatically, a skill learned young and practiced until it became instinct. Inhale. Hold. Exhale halfway. Squeeze, do not jerk. Respect the weapon, and it will serve you. A rider appeared on the rim above, backlit by the sun. The man was scanning the arroyo below, rifles swinging left and right as he searched for movement. Mape fired. The Henry kicked against his shoulder with familiar authority. The man jerked sideways, clutching his left shoulder, and his horse wheeled in panic. Mape levered another round and fired again, but the rider had already dropped behind juniper cover. From the opposite rim, a second man opened fire. Bullets sparked off limestone, each impact sending chips of stone flying. One shard grazed Mape's cheek, drawing blood. He flattened himself against the boulder and counted shots by sound alone. 5, 6, 7. The shooter paused to reload. Mape grabbed the girl's arm. "Run, stay behind me." They ran deeper into the arroyo boots, slipping on loose gravel. The walls narrowed here, closing in until Mape's shoulders nearly brushed both sides. Ahead, the channel twisted sharply left. He took the turn at full speed and found himself in a wider basin choked with scrub cedar that somehow clung to life in this dry stream bed. He threw the girl onto the pony ahead of him and climbed up behind her, wrapping one arm around her waist. The animal grunted with the double weight, but responded to his heels, scrambling up the steep slope that led out of the arroyo. Stones clattered down behind them. Cedar branches whipped Mape's face, leaving thin scratches that burned. They burst onto open prairie just as the sun touched the western horizon, painting the grass gold and amber. Behind them, two riders pulled up at the arroyo's edge, dark shapes against the dying light. One raised his rifle, but the range was too great now and the light was failing. The shot would waste ammunition. Mahpe did not slow. He drove the pony hard until full darkness swallowed the land, until the stars emerged in their thousands, and the prairie became a black ocean beneath a river of light. Only when the pursuit sounds had faded completely did he finally rein to a halt beside a shallow creek, its water barely a trickle between stones. He lifted the girl down. Her legs buckled and she collapsed onto a patch of dry grass, staring up at the stars with eyes that saw nothing. Her chest rose and fell in rapid, shallow breaths. "Who are you?" Moppy asked quietly, still speaking English. Her lips moved. This time a whisper emerged, barely audible above the creek's murmur. "Daisy, Daisy," Moppy repeated. He did not ask for a family name. Names mattered less than survival right now. "Do you know who those men were?" She shook her head, a tiny movement. "Do you know why they want you?" Another headshake, but Mahpi had heard what the lead rider shouted. "Deadeye wants the Alder brat breathing." Alder was a name that carried weight in White River. Everyone in 3 territories knew Constance Alder, the widow who owned Alder Freight and half the timber operations between here and the Missouri. But why would anyone kidnap her child and then try to get her back by burning wagons and shooting drivers? The pieces did not fit together yet. But they would. Mahpi stripped the saddle from his pony and let the animal drink. Then he sat beside Daisy and kept watch rifle across his knees, while his mind turned the problem over and over. The girl fell into exhausted sleep, whimpering occasionally, hands twitching as nightmares chased her through darkness. He built no fire. Fire would draw attention. Instead, he wrapped her in his spare blanket and sat with his back against a cottonwood trunk, watching the darkness until dawn grayed the eastern sky. Someone powerful wanted this girl, and they had just sent Deadeye Dick's men to get her back. Mahpe had made himself their enemy. There would be no talking his way out of this. 2 days later, Mahapi rode into the Lakota camp at dawn, when mist still clung to the willows along the river. The camp was small, 40 people, mostly women, children, and elders. The younger warriors ranged far afield now, hunting the few remaining deer and antelope in territories that shrank every season. 12 lodges stood in a rough circle, patched hides stretched over bent poles, smoke rising from cook fires kept deliberately low. Too much smoke drew cavalry patrols from Storm's End. It was a hard life that grew harder each year. Mape saw it in the hollow cheeks of the children, in the careful way women rationed every scrap of food in the eyes of the elders, who remembered a time when the people had been strong. His sister Winona met him at the camp edge. 24 years old, she had her brother's sharp features and the same dark, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. She wore a simple doeskin dress, her hair in a single braid, and her hands, quick and capable, could dress a deer faster than any man in the band. She took one look at the white girl slumped in front of Mahape, and her expression hardened. "You brought trouble." Trouble found her first. Winona crouched before Daisy, studying her face with the careful attention of someone who had learned to read suffering. Her husband had died 2 winters ago, shot by a cavalry patrol that mistook him for a horse thief. She knew what trauma looked like. "Does she speak?" "A little. Her name is Daisy." Winona reached out slowly and turned Daisy's wrists over, revealing the rope burns. The flesh was red and swollen, beginning to crust, but clearly infected. "Who did this?" "Men who want her back. I killed one. 2 others are still hunting us." Winona's jaw tightened. She glanced toward the lodges where people were beginning to emerge, drawn by curiosity and concern. "You need to speak with the elders. Now." "I know." Winona took Daisy's hand with surprising gentleness. "Come, I will feed you." Mahpe watched them walk toward Winona's lodge near the river. Daisy moved stiffly, each step careful, as if she had forgotten how to trust the ground beneath her feet. She looked back once, her blue eyes finding his, and he nodded. A wordless promise. I will not abandon you. He found Washta sitting outside his lodge, sharpening a knife on a whetstone. The rhythmic rasp of steel on stone was soothing familiar. Washta was 30, lean, and scarred with a pronounced limp from the cavalry bullet that had shattered his left knee 5 years ago during a skirmish near the Platte River. He had been Mape's closest friend since they were boys hunting rabbits together. You look like a man who walked into a snare, Washta said without looking up. Mape sat beside him. 3 men chased me across the grassland yesterday. They wanted the girl I brought back. Why, I do not know. Mape checked the Henry's action habit more than need. But one of them shouted a name before he fired. Dead-Eye Dick. Washta's hands went still. He looked at Mape directly. That name is poison. I know. Then you know that keeping a white child here gives the army every excuse they need to ride in with rifles and burn us out. They will say we are taking captives. They will use it to justify whatever they want. The whites who held her are the ones who put ropes on her wrists. Mape said quietly. If I had left her, she would be dead now, or worse. So you saved her. That is good. Now take her to White River and let the whites deal with their own problems. The whites in White River are the problem. Washta was silent for a long moment, considering. Finally he sighed and set the knife aside. What will you do? Adopt her, formally. Washta stared at him. You are serious? Yes. The elders will say you are a fool. Perhaps. Mape met his friend's gaze without flinching. But I gave her water. I carried her to safety. By doing that, I took responsibility. I will not break it now just because keeping it is dangerous. Washta shook his head slowly. Then I will stand with you when you face them. But if this brings soldiers down on the camp, they will blame you first. And I will not be able to protect you from that. I do not ask you to. That evening, Mape stood before the council fire. The elders sat in a half-circle, their faces carved by decades of sun and wind into deep lines that mapped lives of endurance. Gray Owl, the eldest, at 70 winters, sat at the center. His hair hung white and thin over his shoulders, but his eyes remained sharp. He had survived more battles, more betrayals, more winters than anyone else in the band. His authority was absolute. Mape described finding Daisy under the burned wagon, the chase across the prairie, the bullets that had come too close. When he finished, Gray Owl sat silent for a long moment, staring into the flames as if seeking wisdom there. This girl is white. Gray Owl said finally, his voice like wind over stones. Her people will come looking for her. Her people put ropes on her wrists and left her under a burning wagon. Mape replied carefully. I do not think they want her for good reasons. And yet they chased you. They fired rifles at you. They want her alive. Gray Owl's gaze was penetrating. That means she has value to them. Value they will kill to protect. If we harbor her, we put ourselves between them and what they want. I understand that. Blue Heron, a woman healer of 60 winters, leaned forward. If you take her as kin through adoption, you take responsibility for her actions. If she brings harm to this camp, if soldiers come because of her, that harm falls on you. Do you accept this? I do. Blue Heron studied him. This is not finding a wounded dog in the grass. This is taking a white child as your daughter in a time when whites and our people kill each other over land, over horses, over words. You are tying your fate to hers. That is a heavy burden. Are you certain? I am certain. Blue Heron looked at Gray Owl. And if the army comes, Washta spoke from his place at the circle's edge, breaking protocol, but speaking truth. They will come whether we have the girl or not. Last summer they came because a horse wandered onto settler land. The summer before they came because we hunted beyond the boundaries they drew on their maps. They do not need real reasons. They need excuses. This girl changes nothing except that now we know why they will come. Gray Owl nodded slowly. This is truth. He turned back to Moppy. Very well. You may adopt the child according to our customs. But if she proves dangerous to the band, the council will decide her fate, not you. Your promise extends only as far as her worthiness. Do you accept this condition? The words were harder than Moppy expected, but he understood their necessity. I accept. The adoption ceremony was held at sunset. Winona brought Daisy to the council fire, wearing a clean doe-skin dress that had belonged to Winona's daughter dead 3 years from fever. The dress hung loose on Daisy's thin frame. Her hair had been washed in the river and braided in the traditional way. She stood beside Moppy, eyes fixed on the ground, hands clasped tight. Gray Owl placed a wooden bowl between them. The bowl contained venison broth rich with wild onions and sage steam rising into the cooling air. He spoke in Lakota, his voice carrying the weight of generations. This broth is shared between father and daughter. Let it bind them as blood binds family. Let the deer's strength pass into the child. Let the earth's wisdom feed her spirit. Moppy lifted the bowl and drank. The broth was hot, almost scalding, but he did not flinch. The taste was rich fat and herbs and carefully rationed meat. He lowered the bowl and offered it to Daisy. She hesitated, looking up at him with those creek-water eyes. He nodded encouragement. She took the bowl in both small hands and sipped carefully. The heat made her grimace, but she drank. Gray Owl tied a length of braided sweetgrass around Daisy's wrist just above the rope burns. This will guard you. Wear it until it falls away naturally. Then he turned to Moppy. Speak your promise. Moppy placed his hand on Daisy's shoulder. Her bones felt fragile beneath his palm, bird-like and breakable. I will feed you, teach you and protect you as long as I draw breath. You are my daughter now. The people here are your people. The land that feeds us will feed you. When I die, others will remember this promise and honor it. Daisy looked up at him, searching his face for something truth, safety, the assurance that adults could be trusted. Finally, she spoke. Will you keep me safe? The question was simple, but it carried the weight of everything she had endured. The ropes, the fire, the men with guns. Yes, Moppy said. I will keep you safe. She nodded slowly, as if sealing a contract. Then she reached up and took his hand. Her grip was surprisingly strong. The gathered people murmured approval. It was done. 40 miles away in White River, Dr. Theodore Finch sat in his surgery and studied a ledger by lamplight. He was 43 years old, tall and thin with wire-rimmed spectacles and ink stains that never quite washed from his fingers. He had come west 8 years ago, fleeing a failed marriage in Philadelphia and debts from patients too poor to pay. White River had promised a fresh start. Now it felt like complicity. The ledger lay open on his desk, a record of children who had arrived in White River over the past 2 years. Most came on the orphan train from eastern cities, part of a program meant to place homeless children with farm families who needed help. But Finch had noticed a disturbing pattern. Some children arrived, stayed briefly, then vanished. When he asked Albert Grimes, the local freight agent everyone called Goldie, where they went, the man shrugged and said they had been placed with families. Finch did not believe him. He traced his finger down the page. Most entries were sparse, first names or initials, ages, vague destinations. But one entry had caught his attention weeks ago and would not let go. D. Alder, female, age 3, freight code A47. The freight code matched codes he had glimpsed on Goldie's shipping manifests when treating a worker's crushed hand. Alder. Everyone in 3 territories knew that name. Constance Alder owned the freight company, had built it alongside her late husband Marcus before his death in a logging accident 6 years ago. She had taken over the business when men expected her to sell, proving them all wrong. If a child with the Alder name had passed through Goldie's ledgers 4 years ago, where was she now? Why was there no record of her placement? Finch closed the ledger and locked it in his desk drawer. Asking questions in White River could get a man killed, shot in an alley, and left to bleed while people stepped over the body on their way to the saloon. But he could not shake the feeling that something terrible was happening, something that involved children who had no voice and no power. The question was whether he had the courage to do anything about it. On the hill overlooking White River, Constance Alder stood at her study window and watched the sun set. She was 34 years old, though grief had carved lines around her eyes and mouth that made her look older. She wore a simple dark dress with a high collar, her auburn hair pinned in a practical bun. She had been called beautiful once Marcus had told her so, his hands gentle on her face. But beauty was a luxury she could no longer afford. Running a freight company in a territory where women were not supposed to run anything required steel. She had learned to be hard. But the hardness was armor over a wound that never healed. On her desk lay a letter from an Eastern agency, the 5th such letter this year. The agency claimed her daughter, missing for 4 years, had likely drowned in the Missouri River during a barge accident near Tin Cup. They suggested with professional sympathy that Mrs. Alder should accept this conclusion and cease further inquiries. Constance did not believe them, had never believed them. Her daughter had been 3 years old when she vanished. They had been traveling on a supply barge moving freight downriver when the boat docked overnight. Constance had put the child down for a nap in the cabin. 1 hour later, the cabin was empty. The window stood open. Her daughter was gone. The crew claimed the child must have climbed out and fallen into the river. But Constance had found no wet footprints, no signs of struggle. Just an open window and an empty room. It had felt wrong then. It felt wrong now. 2 weeks ago, her ranch foreman, a Crow man named Bear Claw, had brought her information. A freight wagon had been attacked near White River. The driver was dead. A Lakota warrior had taken a blonde girl matching her daughter's current age. Constance's heart had nearly stopped. She pulled out fresh paper and began writing a list in her precise hand-send Bear Claw to scout Lakota camps, hire investigators with territorial experience, review all freight manifests from the past 4 years, especially those handled by Goldie. She paused on that last item. Something about Albert Grimes had always unsettled her, though she could never articulate why. He was efficient, his paperwork meticulous, his office ran smoothly. But his eyes were flat empty of warmth or empathy. She would find her daughter. And no one would stand in her way. The next morning, Mahpi took Daisy to the river to teach her how to stand in current. The lesson was brutal but necessary. The White River ran fast and cold, fed by mountain snowmelt, carving through the valley with relentless force. Children drowned in it every year. If Daisy was going to survive here, she needed to respect the water. Mahpi waded in first, feeling the cold bite through his leggings. He turned and held out his hand. "Come." Daisy stood on the bank, staring at the water. Her breathing came quick and shallow. She was not just afraid of the current, she was terrified of drowning, of being swept away and never coming back. "The water is cold," Mape said, naming the fear because sometimes that helped. "But it will not harm you if you stand correctly. Plant your feet wide, bend your knees slightly, lean forward into the current. Do you understand?" She nodded but did not move. "I will not let you fall," Mape said quietly. Finally, she stepped into the water. It swirled around her ankles. She took another step, moving with painful slowness. The current pushed at her knees. Her foot slipped on a smooth stone and she windmilled her arms, terror flashing across her face. Mahpi caught her shoulder, steadying her. "Good. You did not fall. Try again." They practiced for an hour. Each slip he caught her. Each time she wanted to quit, he encouraged one more try. By the end, she could cross the shallow section without falling. A small smile touched her lips, the first real expression he had seen from her. That was when Mahpi spotted the horseshoe prints on the far bank. Fresh prints. Deep impressions in mud. 3 horses had stood there within the last hour, watching from the cottonwood shadows. His gut tightened. "Daisy, go back to camp. Run. Do not stop." "Wipe. Run." She ran. Mahpi started after her. He was halfway across the river when the first shot cracked from the cottonwoods. The bullet hit water 2 feet to his left, throwing up spray. He lunged for a boulder on the near bank as 2 more shots followed. One struck the rock, spraying stone chips that bit into his thigh like hornets. 3 riders burst from the trees and plunged into the river horses, churning water to foam. 2 carried rifles. The third swung a lasso. "Take the girl," someone shouted. Deadeye wants the alder brat breathing. Mahpi rose and fired from the hip. The shot went high but startled the roped man's horse. The animal reared and dumped its rider into the shallows. The second rider fired. The bullet grazed Mahpi's bicep, a line of fire that made him gasp. He dropped behind the boulder and levered another round. The third rider had circled toward the willows, where Daisy stood frozen. She saw him coming, but her legs would not move. The rider leaned low, reaching for her. Daisy's hand found a piece of driftwood. She swung it hard into the horse's knee. The animal stumbled. The rider flew over its head into the willows. Mahpi fired twice more, clipping one rider's shoulder. The men regrouped, cursing. "Fall back. We know where they camp now." They vanished into the cottonwoods. Mahpi grabbed Daisy, and they ran, bullets chasing them up a rocky ravine until pursuit sounds faded. He knelt beside her afterward, checking for injuries. Her hands were scraped, but she was whole. "You hit that horse hard. I did not want him to take me." Good, but Mahpi knew the truth now. These men were not bandits. They were part of something connected to the Alder name and freight wagons carrying orphans nobody asked about. And they would come again. That night, Daisy's fever returned. She lay shivering in Winona's lodge despite the fire. Her forehead burned under Mahpi's palm. The rope burns on her wrists were infected red lines radiating outward blood poisoning. Winona shook her head. "I have herbs, but they will not be enough. She needs a white doctor's medicine. Then I will take her to White River. You will be killed. If I do nothing, she dies here." Winona looked at her sleeping sons, then back at Mahpi. "If you bring soldiers back, we all die. I will be careful." Washta appeared. "Then I come with you." "No, stay with the camp." Washta wanted to argue, but knew Mahpi was right. He stepped aside. Mahpi wrapped Daisy in his blue cavalry coat and rode into the night. White River was quiet when Mahpi reached Dr. Finch's surgery through the back alley. He knocked softly. The door cracked open. Finch's face appeared suspicious. "What do you want?" Mahpi shifted Daisy so Finch could see her fevered face. "She needs help." Finch's expression changed instantly. He pulled the door wide. "Bring her in." Inside, Finch examined Daisy under lamplight, checking her pulse, peeling back her eyelids, inspecting the infected wounds. He cleaned them with carbolic acid while Daisy whimpered and Mahpi held her shoulders. "Where did you find her?" Finch asked. "Under a burned wagon. Men chased us. They want her back." "Did they say why?" "No, but one mentioned Deadeye Dick." Finch went pale. He crossed to his desk and pulled out a folded telegraph. "Read this." The paper showed, "Orphan Manifest, White River Station, D. Alder, female age 3, freight code A47. "What does this mean?" Mahpi asked. 4 years ago, a child named D. Alder was transported through White River on an orphan wagon. The code matches shipments run by Goldie Grimes. He runs the local Alder freight office. "Alder," Mahpi repeated. "The widow on the hill." "Yes. Constance Alder. Her daughter disappeared 4 years ago. The official story says she drowned, but I think someone took her and put her on an orphan wagon." Mahpi looked at Daisy. "You think this is her daughter?" "I do not know for certain, but the age fits, and men are trying to kill you for her." Before Mape could respond, fists pounded on the front door. "Finch, open up." Sheriff Mortimer Hale's voice. Finch grabbed Daisy and shoved her into a coal bin, slamming the lid. He thrust a pistol at Mape. "Go out the back. If I run, they call me kidnapper. If you stay, they shoot you. Then let them see I have done nothing wrong." Finch stared at him. "You are a fool." He opened the door. Sheriff Hale stood flanked by 4 armed men. Behind them, a crowd had gathered shopkeepers' ranch hands, all armed. Hale was short with a drooping mustache and nervous eyes. "I heard a savage brought a child here. Mr. Mape brought a sick girl for treatment." Finch said calmly, "That is not a crime." "Where is she?" "Gone. Sent with a woman who will place her with a family under Mrs. Alder's charity program." Hale pushed past boots thudding. His men searched, knocking over instruments. One deputy leaned close to Mape. "You smell like smoke, Savage." Mape met his gaze. "Nothing that concerns you." The deputy's hand dropped to his pistol. "You want to try me?" "Enough," Finch snapped. "If you shoot a man in my surgery, I will report it as murder to the territorial marshal." Hale glared but knew Finch was right. Before he could respond, another man appeared in the doorway. Albert Grimes was soft-looking mid-40s with slicked hair and gold rings on each pinky. He wore an expensive gray suit and smelled of cigars and rosewater. His eyes were flat and bored. "Gentlemen," Goldie said mildly, "this is a waste of time. Dr. Finch has explained. Let us not create spectacles." His word carried weight. He controlled jobs. In White River, jobs meant everything. Hale gestured to his men, and they filed out. The crowd dispersed. Goldie lingered in the doorway, studying Mape with those flat eyes. Then he tipped his hat to Finch and disappeared. Finch locked the door. He pulled Daisy from the coal bin, her face streaked with coal dust, and handed Mape a brown bottle. "Quinine powder? Mix with water twice daily." He pressed a folded paper into Mape's other hand. "The Telegraph. If you need proof of who she is, that is a start." "Why help us?" Finch looked at Daisy. "Because no child should be cargo." Mape slipped out the back and rode into darkness. But in the shadows, Goldie stood watching. He had seen the coal dust on Finch's cuffs. He knew the child was alive, and he knew exactly where they were going. Constance received Finch's telegraph at dawn. Urgent matter regarding orphan shipments. Grimes stonewalling, request meeting. She read it twice. Someone was using her company for purposes she had not approved. She called for Bear Claw. "Saddle horses, we ride to town." "Take the wagon," Bear Claw said. "More cover, and bring armed men." She agreed. An hour later, they followed the trail through rocky hills. The ambush came at a narrow choke point. A boulder rolled across the road. Gunfire erupted from both ridges. One hired man fell instantly, shot through the neck, blood spraying. Horses screamed. Bear Claw cut the traces, freeing the team before the wagon overturned. Constance threw herself behind a rock, grabbed her carbine, and returned fire with shaking hands. "You ever use one of those, ma'am?" Bear Claw growled. "Not until today," she snapped. She braced the carbine and squeezed the trigger. The recoil bruised her shoulder. The shot flew true, dropping a man from the ridge. Bear Claw fired methodically, driving attackers back. After 10 minutes, the shooting stopped. They found one man alive, gut shot. Bear Claw pulled down his bandana. "Who sent you?" Bear Claw demanded. The man laughed wetly, coughing blood. "Goldie? Said scare the widow so she stays home and signs the papers." "What papers?" "The ones giving him control if you remarry or kick the bucket." His head lolled. He died. Bear Claw found a leather satchel on the dead man's horse. Inside were guardianship papers giving Goldie control of Alder freight plus orphan manifests with freight codes and prices evidence of child trafficking. Constance's hands shook as she read. "He has been selling children under my company's name." They rode for White River, watching the ridges ready for more attacks. 50 miles away, Mape fortified an old hunting cabin. The structure sat in a natural bowl, hidden but defensible. Mape checked firing slits between logs, dragged water barrels from a spring, nailed a bar across the door. Daisy sat on a rock watching. The quinine had broken her fever, but she remained weak. "Why are we here?" she asked. "Men are looking for you. If they come, we will be ready." He taught her to load a revolver, counting cartridges. In one moment he stood behind her, steadying her arms as she aimed at a post. She felt his breath near her ear, not romantic, but solid anchoring. "Thumb back slow," he murmured. "Steady pressure." She flinched at the hammer's click. He shifted instinctively between her and the open yard, shielding her. "Why do I need this?" she asked. "Because I cannot protect you every moment. If someone tries to hurt you, you must defend yourself. It is not fair. But survival matters. Do you understand?" She studied his face. "I understand." That evening, Mahape scouted and found the ambush site. Among the rocks, he discovered Constance's dropped satchel with the guardianship papers and orphan manifests. He stuffed them in his shirt and rode back. That night, Daisy asked, "If they take me, will you come after me?" He placed his hand on her shoulder. "They will not take you. I promise to keep you safe. But what if you cannot stop them? Then I will come after you. No matter where, no matter how long. You are my daughter now." She nodded, some tension leaving her. But her hand still trembled. The attack came just before dawn. Mahpi woke to horses in the brush. He grabbed the Henry and crouched by the door. Across the cabin, Daisy's eyes went wide. "Stay down," he whispered. Gunfire erupted. Bullets smashed through shutters, tearing wood. A lantern fell kerosene, catching fire flames, licking up the wall. One water barrel was hit, water gushing. Mahpi kicked open a shutter and fired twice, dropping one rider. Another bullet whined past his ear. Daisy crawled under the bunk, clutching her doll. "Burn them out," someone shouted. "We need the girl alive." A kerosene rag hit the roof. Flames spread. Smoke filled the cabin, choking them. Mahpe kicked loose a weak section of back wall, opening a gap. He shoved Daisy through into a shallow wash, then followed firing to cover their escape. Bear Claw and Dr. Finch appeared, helping them run. Behind them, Constance Alder followed, carbine ready. In the chaos, one of Goldie's men grabbed Daisy and hauled her onto a horse. Goldie appeared, taking her, clamping his arm around her waist. "Sign everything over, Constance, or she goes on that eastbound train and disappears forever." By the time flames consumed the cabin, Daisy was gone. Bear Claw knelt, wounded bullet through his ribs. Mape's shoulder bled freely. Constance stood frozen, staring at where her daughter had been. Finch learned Goldie had arranged a special train departing at dawn from Ruby Ridge Siding. They had 6 hours. Mahashpi, Finch, Sheriff Hale, who finally broke and offered to testify, and Washta with Lakota warriors rode through the night. They reached Ruby Ridge at dawn. The canyon was narrow, the White River roaring below. A wooden trestle spanned the gorge tracks, suspended on creaking timber pilings. A train waited, engine hissing. Goldie held Daisy and 3 other children in a shed near the tracks. "The slope is too steep," Washta said. "We will be cut down climbing. Then we climb the back way," Mapi said, pointing to scree-covered slope. "There is cover." The climb was brutal. Loose shale slid with every step. Mahpe led with his good arm. When his wounded shoulder failed, Constance, who had insisted on coming, climbed past and threw down a rope. "Grab it." She hauled him up, leaning back with all her weight boots digging into shale. They reached the top together, gasping. Goldie spotted them and fired. The bullet grazed Constance's arm. She stumbled but stayed upright. Mahpe fired back. Goldie ducked into the shed. "He's going into the mine," Washta said, pointing to a dark tunnel behind the shed. They entered single file. The air was damp, thick with mold and bat droppings. Water dripped from the ceiling. Ahead, Mapi heard Daisy's muffled cries. Dead-eyed Dick fired blindly back, muzzle flashes blinding in the dark. A stray bullet hit a support beam. The timber cracked. "Move," Washta shouted. The ceiling began collapsing. Finch went down buried to the waist. Sheriff Hale threw himself forward and shoved Finch clear, taking falling timber across his legs. The tunnel caved behind them, cutting off retreat. Hale lay pinned, legs twisted. Blood pooled beneath him. "Go," Hale gasped. "Get the girl. This is my penance." Finch felt for his pulse, nodded at Mapi. They left Hale and pressed on. Mapi felt for fresher air and led them through dust. Constance kept one hand on his belt so they would not separate. They burst from the tunnel onto the trestle as the train began moving. Goldie had Daisy on the caboose platform, pistol to her head. Dead-Eye Dick stood on the trestle with a rifle. Constance knelt, braced the carbine, and fired. The bullet splintered the tie near Deadeye's boots. She fired again. This time the bullet tore through his gun hand. He staggered and dived off the trestle, hitting the water hard, disappearing among boulders. Mahpi jumped for the caboose ladder, pulling himself up one-handed. The drop below roared with white water. On the platform, Goldie pressed the pistol harder against Daisy's temple. "Sign the papers or she goes under the wheels." Mahpe hauled himself over the railing, swaying. "You throw her, and this river takes us both." Goldie swung the pistol toward Mahapi. "You should have stayed dead." Daisy, remembering the river lesson, suddenly drove her boot heel into Goldie's shin and shoved off his chest. He staggered backward, boots slipping on vibrating boards, and fell between the caboose and coal car. The train did not stop. Mape grabbed Daisy and crushed her to his chest. Then, as the trestle rushed past and the train continued, he stretched and passed her across the narrowing gap to Constance, who ran along the ties. Their hands met around the girl's body, forming a living bridge over the deadly fall. Together, they hauled her to safety. The train rattled away. Daisy clung to Constance, sobbing. Constance held her daughter for the first time in 4 years, tears streaming. Mape stood apart, watching. Washta appeared beside him. "She's not yours," Washta said quietly. "I know," Mape replied. "But you kept your promise." "Yes." They stood in the dawn light, and Mape felt something break inside the shape his life had taken. He had been a father. Now that was ending. It was right, necessary, but it still hurt. Back in White River, the truth emerged slowly. Goldie's ledger, recovered by Marshal Caleb Ross, showed everything: payments for child placements, freight codes, prices beside entries like invoices for livestock. The operation had run for years. Sheriff Hale, after having both legs amputated to save his life, confessed everything. He named accomplices, accepted full responsibility. The judge sentenced him to 10 years. Constance halted all orphan shipments until proper oversight existed. She funded an office where Finch and a teacher reviewed every child's paperwork. No more anonymous transfers. At Bear Claw's burial on a hill above the river, Mapi planted a cedar sapling. Constance arranged Bear Claw's hat and rifle on the mound. Wind cut through their clothes. "You lost men before I arrived," Constance said quietly. "You lost your daughter while safe under a roof. Same weight, different storms." A gust nearly toppled the young cedar. They both reached to steady it, hands meeting on bark. Neither pulled away quickly, a small moment of shared grief rather than easy comfort. The weeks after were difficult. Daisy stayed at Constance's ranch, sleeping in a real bed, eating regular meals. She was quiet at first, but slowly relaxed under patient care. Mahpi visited weekly riding from the valley. Each visit felt awkward. Daisy would run to him, hug him, then return to Constance's side. He would leave feeling hollow. Washta found him by the river one evening. "You are thinking too much." "Perhaps. She has a mother, a home. That is what you wanted." "I know. Then why do you look like you lost everything?" Mapi was silent. "Because I lost something. Not everything. But something important. You can visit her. It is not the same." Washta sat beside him. "No, it is not. But it is what you have." Constance wrestled with her own feelings. She was grateful beyond words to have her daughter back. But she also knew Daisy had been safe because of Moppy, a debt she could never repay. More than that, she found herself thinking about him at odd moments. The way he moved through danger without hesitation, his quiet competence, the grief in his eyes when he looked at Daisy, knowing he had to let go. One afternoon, she rode to the Lakota camp with Daisy and gifts, blankets, beef, flour, coffee. Gray Owl received them. They sat in shade while Daisy played with Winona's sons. "I want to propose an arrangement," Constance said through translation. "Daisy is my daughter, but she belongs to your people now through adoption. I do not want to sever that. Let her spend part of each year with Mape learning your ways, the rest with me learning to read and manage business. When grown, she can choose, but she will know both worlds." Gray Owl looked at Mape. "What do you say?" Mape's throat tightened. "It is a good arrangement. I am willing," Constance said, looking at him directly. "More than willing." Gray Owl nodded. "Then we agree. The girl walks between two worlds." They formalized it in writing a contract signed by Constance Gray Owl, witnessed by Marshall Ross. Not legally binding in white courts, but carrying moral weight. That spring, the alliance deepened. Constance used Goldie's documents to push broader investigations. She testified before a grand jury, leading to more indictments. She funded writers warning nearby bands about fake reform schools. Gray Owl allowed alder freight across hunting grounds, provided they carried no children without consent. Practical arrangement born of need, but it worked. Mape served as liaison, traveling between camp and town. Strange work for a warrior, but important, and it meant he saw Constance regularly. The final trial came when the river flooded. Daisy at the ranch ventured too close to the swollen bank to fill a bucket. The ground gave way. She plunged into icy, churning water, screaming. Mape sprinted from the barn and dove in without hesitation. The current was stronger than expected, tearing at them both. His wounded shoulder screamed. He grabbed Daisy's wrist, but the water threatened to rip her away. Constance ran from the house, grabbed the rope, kept on a post for emergencies, and threw it to Mape. He caught it one-handed, looped it around his chest, and held Daisy with his other arm. Constance and Finch leaned back with all their weight. For a breathless moment, the river seemed to win. Then Daisy's hand closed on Mape's sleeve. That small act of will gave him something to hold. He pulled her close and kicked toward the bank. Together they hauled her onto muddy ground. She lay coughing, shaking. Mape collapsed beside her. Constance dropped to her knees, pulled Daisy into her arms, then reached out and grabbed Mape's hand, squeezing hard. "Thank you," she said, voice breaking. He nodded, too exhausted to speak. They sat together on the muddy bank, while the river roared past three people bound by shared survival. Summer came with heat and long work days. Daisy spent mornings at the ranch, learning to read from Sarah March and manage accounts from Constance. She learned freight manifests, profit margins, negotiations. She was quick and clever. Afternoons, she rode to the Lakota camp, where Mape taught her tracking edible plants, reading weather. She learned to move quietly, wait patiently, respect the land. She became fluent in both English and Lakota. She wore doeskin at Camp Calico at the ranch. She belonged to both worlds and stopped seeing them as separate. Mape and Constance, drawn together by shared responsibility, spent more time together. It was never deliberate, but when Constance needed someone to scout freight routes, she asked Mape. When Mape needed supplies, he came to Constance. The romance grew slowly, not dramatic passion from novels. Quieter, built on trust earned through survival, respect forged in crisis, on simply making each other's lives better. One evening in late summer, Constance stood in a clean white dress before Mape's rebuilt cabin. Sky, huge mountains distant. Daisy stood between them, one hand in Mape's, the other in her mother's skirt. The sun was brutal. Mape shifted so his shadow fell across both Daisy and Constance. She noticed, hesitated, then chose not to step out of that shade. She stayed beside him under the same shelter as wind tugged at all three, and the wide country stretched away. "Will you come to the ranch for harvest?" Constance asked. "If you need me," Mape replied. "I always need you, not as hired help, as a partner, someone I trust." Mape looked at her surprised. In months of facing death together, they had never spoken plainly about what existed between them. "What would people in town say?" he asked. "I do not care what they say. I care what is right. And this," she gestured between them, "this is right." Daisy tugged her mother's skirt. "Can I stay with Mape this summer?" Constance looked at her daughter, then at Mape. "If he will have you." Daisy looked up hopefully. The fear that haunted her when he first found her was gone, replaced by confidence and joy. "Yes," Mape said, smiling genuinely. "You can stay." She grinned and ran toward the river, chasing a dragonfly laughter carrying on the wind. Constance watched her go. For the first time in 4 years, grief began to lift. She turned to Mape. "She is happy." "Yes, because of you. Because you saved her. Because you kept your promise." He shook his head. "Because of both of us. I could not have protected her alone. You could not have found her without help. We did it together." Constance studied his face lines carved by wind scars from battle's quiet strength. Slowly, she reached out and took his hand. Calloused palm against calloused palm. "Partners," she said. "Partners," he agreed. They stood in late afternoon light, wind tugging close, mountains rising like ancient sentinels. Not the ending either expected when this began, when Mape found a terrified child under a burned wagon, when Constance received a telegraph about a girl taken by a warrior. But it was the ending they earned through blood and fear and right choices when easier paths existed. In the distance, Daisy's laughter rang as she splashed in shallows, learning to plant her feet against currents strong, in knowledge that if she slipped, someone would catch her. The sun sank lower, painting grass gold and amber. Mother-daughter and the warrior who chose to save them both stood together on the edge of the wide, hard country that was now their home.